Thank you, Rick, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I was born and raised in a small town in upstate New York called Painted Post. Population 2,000. Yes, that's its real name. Our neighbors in the tightly knit community in which I was raised were mostly white, mostly Christian, and mostly conservative. One of my fondest memories as a child was spending an evening after school with my mother in our kitchen making one of my favorite Pakistani sweets, jalebis. Now, if you haven't had one before, they're delicious. They're bright orange, pretzel-shaped, and super sweet. I was so excited to bring a batch of these jalebis to school with me the next day to share with my classmates. And as I watched them dig into the batch of jalebis, I was so excited to see that my classmates were enjoying this delectable sweet as much as I did, and were taking great interest in my family and my culture. You see, in the America I grew up in, differences were shared, embraced, and even celebrated. And my family and I had the freedom to practice our faith. So much has changed since then. On September 11th, 2001, I was working for U.S. Senator Russ Feingold, advising him on civil rights issues facing our country. For those of us who were in New York City and Washington, D.C. that fateful day, we have memories that will be with us for the rest of our lives. There was so much fear. Fear for the safety of our nation and fear for the safety of our loved ones. One vivid memory I have is later that same day, that evening, I heard about an American Muslim woman who was wearing hijab, or the headscarf, who was almost run down in a grocery store parking lot in Long Island. In the days and weeks later, I would hear Muslim women who wear hijab, including some people I knew, who would have very serious conversations about whether they should simply remove their headscarves to ensure their personal safety. The Bush administration and Congress, of course, were quick to respond to the attacks and introduced the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act would not only expand law enforcement and intelligence gathering, but would erode core Fourth Amendment protections. The political pressures were so great that members of Congress were eager, felt the pressure to just do something. And they were willing to throw away the Bill of Rights, even though each of them had sworn an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. There was nearly unanimous support in the United States Senate. But there was one senator who did not go along, and that was Senator Feingold. If you can just imagine the amount of political courage it took to stand up in those weeks and days after September 11th, his courage inspires me deeply to this day. In the months and years later, I would be an eyewitness to other bad laws and policies that would be developed and implemented, all without an American Muslim voice at the table. And so I left Capitol Hill, and with a group of friends and colleagues who were lawyers and policy experts like me, we started Muslim Advocates, an organization focused on protecting freedoms for Americans of all faith. We do our work by advocating with officials at the highest level of government. We litigate with strategic, high-impact lawsuits, and we educate and empower the American Muslim community. Now, as you can imagine, the challenges have been many. But the last few years in particular seem to be especially difficult and harrowing times for the American Muslim community. In 2010, Pam Geller, an anti-Muslim activist and blogger, led a series of protests and demonstrations right here in New York to oppose the proposed construction of a community center in Lower Manhattan. Her demonstration sparked almost wall-to-wall, 24/7 news coverage. Later that year, Congressman Peter King would announce that he would hold hearings on the, quote, the radicalization of the American Muslim community, unquote. In other words, code words for fanning the flames of fear. And in 2011, as a result of news reports by the Associated Press, we would learn that the New York Police Department was spying on innocent Muslims who were simply going about their daily lives, going to the mosque, going to school, going to the store, simply because they were Muslim. It was discrimination, plain and simple. Hate rallies, political witch hunts, discriminatory policing. Together, these activities send a message to the American people that Muslims should be feared. In fact, it's not surprising then that during the same time, according to the FBI's own statistics, hate crimes have skyrocketed and have been at nearly 50% increased since their prior levels. So what can we do? You know, it's almost understandably at some level human instinct that when you're under attack, to recoil, to duck, to hide. But at Muslim Advocates, we understand that to fight fear and discrimination, you have to stay engaged. You have to reach across and understand the differences. And you have to stand up tall for what is right. And as the saying goes, to have a friend, you have to be a friend. And that is why in 2009, when the Human Rights Campaign reached out and asked us to support federal legislation that would prohibit employment discrimination against the LGBT community, we said yes, becoming the first Muslim organization to stand tall on this issue. You can imagine our delight then when 2 years later, the LGBT community responded in kind. PFLAG National, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force Action Fund, all came out strongly condemning the Peter King hearings and calling them for what they were, an ugly, un-American witch hunt. We've also partnered with the Anti-Defamation League, the Sikh Coalition, the Interfaith Alliance, dozens and dozens of faith, civil rights, civic organizations to address the troubling rise in religion-based hate crimes. You see, we understand that intolerance and hate is directed not only at Muslims, but also Jews and Sikhs. And when we learned about the NYPD spying program, we knew we could not fight this fight alone. As we were preparing our lawsuit and other legal actions against the NYPD, we reached out again and put together a group of over 100 civil rights, civic, and faith organizations who joined with us in our calls on the attorneys general of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and the United States, calling for an investigation of the New York Police Department for its discriminatory policing program. Now, these are great examples of what we do at Muslim Advocates and what it means to actually band together with your friends and your allies to stand tall against injustice. You know, when I'm in meetings with allies or in a coalition meeting, I often think back to my time as a child and sharing those jalebis and remembering what it means to actually reach across our differences and find common ground. So while the challenges have been many, there have been signs of hope. You may have heard on April 15th, the New York Police Department announced, sorry, went the wrong way there. Can't get enough of the jalebis. the New York Police Department announced that it had disbanded the Muslim spying unit. Now, this step forward would not have been possible if we had not taken legal action and a coalition of dozens and dozens of groups and Americans had not lifted their voices. And while we certainly relish this step forward, we know that our work is not yet done. We are continuing to keep up the pressure on the New York Police Department until they clearly and definitively say that they will no longer send undercover cops and informants to spy on innocent Muslims. While the challenges are many, I have hope. I have hope because I know that at the core of who we are as Americans is that we don't treat each other differently based on how we look or how we pray. We are at our best. We are at our strongest when we come together with our shared values and we're not divided by our differences. I look forward to creating a future where families can go to the mosque and not be viewed with suspicion, where a woman wearing hijab can go about her daily life, going to the grocery store, picking up her kids, going to work without fear of being attacked. And in America where a school child does not have to fear being bullied and instead can share her differences and perhaps even forge a friendship based on a mutual love of sweets. That is the America I know we can be. If my last 9 years as being executive director of Muslim Advocates have taught me anything, it is this, that we can't do this alone. We need all Americans of goodwill coming together, working together to create a better future for each of us. I hope you will join us. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Great, thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Farhana. That was terrific.